The world has long been told that Africa is poor, yet beneath its soil lies the wealth of empires, and within its youth beats the heart of tomorrow. Today, in the red dust of Burkina Faso, a new chapter is being written, one that dares to challenge centuries of extraction and dependency. When Ibrahim Traoré stands before his people and proclaims that gold, land, and labor belong to Africans, it is not just a speech, it is a rupture in the old order. It is the sound of chains beginning to crack. The injustice is not hidden. Africa holds 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, yet it imports billions in food. It is rich in cobalt, uranium, and platinum, yet its children walk past mines without tasting the wealth beneath their feet. For too long, the continent's harvest has been carried away by others. But now, a younger generation is asking, if political freedom was achieved in the 20th century, why not economic sovereignty in the 21st? Do not look away. What comes next may alter how we all read history. Subscribe and keep walking with us. In the heart of West Africa, where the landlocked nation of Burkina Faso has often been dismissed as peripheral, a remarkable shift is taking place. The story begins with Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier who rose to power not by accident, but by seizing a moment when his people demanded dignity over dependency. His leadership crystallized into a message. Africa must no longer be a quarry for foreign powers, but a continent capable of transforming its own resources into prosperity. The first decisive act came with the expulsion of French troops. For decades, military presence had symbolized security, but in truth, it represented surveillance and leverage. By ordering their departure, Traoré broke with precedent and set a bold example. For many Africans, it was a reminder of Thomas Sankara's audacity in the 1980s, when within just 4 years, he drove Burkina Faso to food self-sufficiency, planted 10 million trees against desertification, and declared that dignity mattered more than debt. The parallel was impossible to ignore. But the changes were not symbolic alone. The government announced that gold, a resource that for centuries had been shipped raw across oceans, would now be processed within Burkina Faso. This was not merely a technical decision. It was the planting of a seed. For every ounce refined locally, jobs sprout on home soil, skills are cultivated, and value once lost to foreign banks begins to circulate in Ouagadougou's streets and markets. Alongside mining reform, agricultural initiatives aim to break the strangling paradox. A continent holding 60% of uncultivated arable land, yet spending $60 billion annually on imported food. By investing in local production and demanding that land serve the nation's children rather than foreign supermarkets, Burkina Faso challenged a structural absurdity designed by centuries of extraction. The statistics are stark and undeniable. Africa possesses 30% of global mineral reserves, 80% of platinum, 60% of cobalt, and vast stores of uranium, gold, and rare earth elements vital for modern technology. Its people are the youngest on Earth, with a median age of 19, a demographic wave unmatched in scale, and yet its GDP per capita remains the lowest among continents, a fact that reveals not a deficiency of capacity, but a legacy of exploitation. Traoré's insistence on renegotiating mining contracts was therefore not an act of rebellion against one nation. It was a blueprint, a call for continental transformation. History hangs heavy over these choices. Patrice Lumumba once declared that Congo's minerals belonged to its people. He was assassinated within months. Muammar Gaddafi envisioned a continent-wide gold-backed currency and an African monetary fund. Libya was torn apart by NATO intervention. Thomas Sankara stood for independence and equality and was cut down before his vision matured. Each story became both a warning and an inspiration. To take back what is African is to risk confrontation with global powers. Yet, to refuse is to condemn future generations to chains hidden behind contracts and aid programs. The soil carries memory. Every road built for export crops, every calloused hand sowing fields for others, every diamond lifted from the earth without benefit to its people. All of these mark the collective injustice. But in Burkina Faso, a pivot is visible. The attempt to shift from raw to value added, from extraction to transformation, from silence to voice. This is not charity. This is not aid. This is sovereignty. The events unfolding in Ouagadougou are not an isolated drama. They are a symbol that even in a small, landlocked country, a different rhythm can be heard, one that beats in time with a continental awakening. The question is no longer whether Africa has the resources, the land, or the people. It is whether it will choose to reap its own harvest. If one small landlocked nation can, what stops the rest? The tremors of change are never confined to the borders of one nation. When Burkina Faso forced French troops to pack their bases and leave, the resonance traveled far beyond Ouagadougou. Crowds filled the streets, waving flags, singing songs of independence not yet fully realized but fiercely desired. For the first time in decades, young people felt that their government was not bowing to outside command, but standing upright, unafraid. The energy was electric. Markets that once buzzed only with trade now buzzed with conversation. Could this small nation set the example for the rest of Africa? The symbolism mattered as much as the policy. Where previous leaders spoke of sovereignty but signed contracts that drained it away, Ibrahim Traoré acted with a decisiveness that unsettled Western capitals. International media reacted in a familiar pattern. Headlines shouted of Russian influence, of instability, of coups threatening democracy. Yet the voices of ordinary Burkinabe, those who had lived through years of foreign soldiers and foreign aid without seeing prosperity, were scarcely heard. The narrative was constructed to suggest chaos, but on the ground, many felt clarity. This was a turning point. The parallels with history only sharpened the moment. When Patrice Lumumba, in Congo, declared that Congolese minerals belonged to the Congolese, Western intelligence agencies saw not a patriot, but a threat. When Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency, Western powers saw not innovation, but danger. When Thomas Sankara pursued radical independence, his memory was smeared and erased. Each case illustrated the same truth. The West does not fear authoritarian rulers if they serve external interests. It fears leaders who serve African ones. This recognition turned Burkina Faso into a stage of continental significance. For many across Africa, the sight of Traoré in military fatigues, raising his voice against dependency, awakened memories of Sankara's charisma. But unlike the past, the 21st century has a new weapon: youth connected by technology, spreading images and words faster than propaganda can be imposed. Social media carried images of demonstrations in Ouagadougou to Bamako, Niamey, Lagos, and beyond. The message was not anti-West, it was pro-Africa. Western chancelleries responded with unease. Statements from Washington, Paris, and Brussels expressed concern about regional stability. Analysts warned of the Russian footprint, yet none could disguise the deeper anxiety. If the people of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso all reject the old arrangements. How long before others follow? Inside the country, the tension was palpable but laced with pride. Students in universities spoke of sovereignty not as an abstract concept, but as a daily necessity: the right to work, to farm, to learn without foreign dictates. Farmers in the countryside viewed new agricultural initiatives as a second liberation, this time not from colonial flags, but from imported grain bags stamped with foreign aid logos. The crescendo of emotion was unmistakable. This was not a policy debate. It was an assertion of identity. The rhythm of the streets declared not charity, not pity, sovereignty. And so the climax builds with one crucial uncertainty. The youth are mobilized. The people are inspired. The leaders are defiant. But the storm clouds of geopolitics gather above. History has shown the risks of such defiance, from assassinations to interventions to economic strangulation. What if this defiance is not an exception, but the beginning of a continental pattern? The immediate consequences of Burkina Faso's new direction are felt in every corner of society. In Ouagadougou, the capital, daily conversations now carry an unusual mix of pride and apprehension. On one hand, there is exhilaration that a small nation has dared to say no to centuries of external control. On the other, there is recognition that such defiance comes with a price: political pressure, sanctions, or even attempts at destabilization. In the short term, the departure of foreign troops has left gaps in conventional security arrangements. Villages near conflict zones wonder whether the government can truly defend them without external support. Yet many argue that security tied to foreign agendas was never real security. Instead, there is a call to build legitimacy at home, where the people see their government as their own, not as a proxy for outside powers. This shift is fragile, but it is also essential. Economically, renegotiating mining contracts and committing to process gold within the country has started to redirect value that once left the borders without return. Though the infrastructure is limited, the symbolic effect is powerful. Young engineers, students, and entrepreneurs begin to imagine futures where they are not simply exporters of raw material, but creators of wealth. It is a small step, yet it carries the weight of transformation. Agricultural reforms, too, have begun to ripple across the land. For decades, Burkina Faso, like much of Africa, paradoxically imported food while exporting fertile land for cash crops demanded by foreign markets. New policies focusing on food self-sufficiency remind citizens of Thomas Sankara's achievements decades ago. Fields once prioritized for exports are being reconsidered for maize, millet, and vegetables to feed local families. Farmers describe this as more than policy. It is dignity rooted in the soil. In the medium term, these reforms could reshape national identity. Where once development meant dependency on international donors, it may now mean cultivating independence step by step. Students in secondary schools are already writing essays about sovereignty, as if it were no longer an aspiration, but an expectation. Songs at community gatherings echo with pride, speaking of the land, the harvest, and the hands that will reap what they sow. Of course, this path is not without friction. Diplomatic ties with France and other Western nations have cooled, and new relationships with alternative partners raise questions about sustainability and balance. Critics argue that turning to Russia or China may create new forms of dependency. Supporters respond that the crucial difference lies in bargaining power, that negotiating as equals rather than subordinates makes all the difference. What is clear is that the Ibrahim Traoré legacy is already being written in daily life. For a generation that has known only poverty despite living on resource-rich soil, the idea that their leaders might finally defend their wealth is transformative. The hope is that this legacy will not be confined to one country, but will spread like rainfall across a parched continent. The civil consequences of this moment are not just material, they are psychological. Across Burkina Faso, people speak of walking taller, of feeling less like pawns in a foreign game, and more like agents of their own destiny. This sense of dignity may be the most valuable harvest of all, and yet, a question lingers over every discussion. Will these seeds survive the storms ahead? Will the international system allow a small nation to carve its own path, or will pressure prove too strong? The answer may not lie in Ouagadougou alone, but across the continent. The ripples of Burkina Faso's defiance do not stop at its borders. Across Africa and beyond, governments, organizations, and global powers watch closely, each interpreting the events through their own strategic lens. Within the African Union and ECOWAS, reactions are divided. Some states, tied to long-standing arrangements with France and the European Union, express alarm, warning of instability. Others, quietly or openly, admire the audacity, recognizing in Burkina Faso's stance an echo of the aspirations they too have buried beneath decades of external influence. The African continental free trade area, still young but brimming with potential, suddenly feels less like a bureaucratic framework and more like a weapon of sovereignty, a means to trade with each other rather than rely endlessly on Western markets. The European Union and the United States speak of democracy and stability, but the subtext is economic. For Western capitals, renegotiated mining contracts, gold processed locally, and reduced dependence on aid represent not simply policy shifts, but threats to entrenched interests. Their statements are carefully worded, but the undertone is unmistakable. If Burkina Faso's model spreads, the economic architecture that funnels African wealth outward will weaken. Russia and China, by contrast, are cast in dual roles. To Western media, they are sinister puppeteers. To many Africans, they are pragmatic alternatives. Russia offers military cooperation, stripped of the political conditions that typically accompany Western security partnerships. China continues to provide infrastructure, roads, power plants, railways, visible signs of development that citizens can walk upon and use daily. These relationships are not without risk, but they stand in sharp contrast to decades of promises from Western development agencies that often failed to materialize. This divergence of narratives underscores a profound truth. The debate is not merely about geopolitics, it is about legitimacy. Whose story will define Africa's future? Western media frame leaders like Traoré as destabilizing radicals. Yet to many young Africans, he represents vision, a refusal to accept dependency as destiny. And here emerges a phrase that captures the stakes: the Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050. For critics, it is an unrealistic dream. For supporters, it is a roadmap where African ownership of resources, industry, and trade reshapes the continent by mid-century. The question now extends far beyond Burkina Faso. Will Africa's alliances be dictated by fear of external pressure or by the promise of internal strength? What if Africa's 2050 is not shaped by others, but by Africans themselves? The road ahead for Burkina Faso, and for Africa more broadly, is neither straight nor smooth. The choice to reclaim sovereignty is as perilous as it is promising. Every step forward invites both resistance and possibility. Risks are real. Western powers, unwilling to lose long-standing privileges, may tighten economic screws, restrict access to markets, or employ diplomatic isolation. Sanctions, already hinted at, could threaten fragile economies. Internal divisions, too, present dangers. In a continent of 54 nations, unity cannot be assumed. Competing interests and historic rivalries still linger like stones beneath the soil. Yet opportunities rise like green shoots after rain. The African Continental Free Trade Area lays the groundwork for an integrated market of over 1 billion people, one capable of resisting global shocks and dictating its own terms. Lessons from Asia's post-war development offer guidance. Demand technology transfer, build local industries, climb steadily up the value chain. For Africa, with its unmatched reserves of cobalt, gold, and fertile land, the potential is even greater. Technology is the continent's wildcard. Mobile banking has already revolutionized finance. Renewable energy could power remote villages without reliance on fossil fuels. Digital learning can bring classrooms to every corner where chalkboards once crumbled. With strategic governance, Africa could leapfrog industrial stages that other continents labored through, avoiding old mistakes while crafting new solutions. At the heart of this transformation lies its people, particularly the youth. They are more connected, more informed, and more determined than generations before them. They sing not of despair, but of possibility. Their unity across languages, borders, and histories may become the glue for a new continental identity. Burkina Faso's experiment, therefore, is larger than its own boundaries. It is a test case, a spark. If successful, it proves that sovereignty is not a slogan, but a system, one that feeds its people, employs its workers, and educates its youth without bowing to outside dictates. If it falters, cynics will point to it as proof that independence is impractical. But history is not written by cynics. It is written by those who plant seeds despite the storms. And today, across Africa, seeds are being planted in schools, in factories, in fields, and in the unyielding hearts of its people. The harvest is not yet here, but the seeds are in the ground. Africa's story has too often been told through the lens of loss, resources drained, leaders overthrown, futures deferred. Yet in the heart of Burkina Faso, another story is being written. It is the story of people who refuse to bow, of leaders who dare to place sovereignty above dependency, and of a generation determined to finish the work left incomplete by their predecessors. The message is clear. Political freedom without economic power is a half-built house. To shelter its people, Africa must not only wave its own flags, but also own its mines, process its gold, cultivate its soil, and write its own terms of trade. This is not a distant dream. It is the Ibrahim Traoré Legacy taking shape before our eyes. A reminder that dignity can grow even in the harshest soil. The road to 2050 stretches ahead, filled with risks and obstacles. Yet, within that horizon lies possibility. An Africa whose unity is not rhetorical, but real, whose development is not charity-driven, but self-sustained. This is the Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050, a vision where 1 billion young Africans inherit not dependency but destiny. The question now belongs to history and to us. If one generation achieved independence in the 20th century, will this one secure sovereignty in the 21st? If one small landlocked nation can defy centuries of control, what stops the rest? The call is urgent, but it is also hopeful. Each voice, each action, each step matters. The Ibrahim Traoré legacy will not be measured in speeches alone, but in the courage of Africans who claim what is theirs, and in the solidarity of those who stand beside them. If this story of dignity moves you, do not scroll away. Subscribe, share, and let your voice be part of this journey.